In one of my earlier videos on this channel, inspired by Glenn Loury's famous rant calling Ibram X Kendi a lightweight,
Here's the deal. He's a lightweight, John. He's a lightweight.
I offered my own searing critique of Kendi about the ideas expressed in his best-selling book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And although the critique was well received by my audience and remains one of my best performing videos to date, however, I got one critique of my critique that upset me. I mean, not upset me as in make me angry or mad or sad, but upset me in the sense that he made me think that I may have made a mistake in my analysis and that my assertions about Ibram X Kendi and his definitions could be wrong. This comment that upset me was born from my admittance in that video that I hadn't actually read the book but only critiqued it based on the videos I saw online of Kendi talking about the book. I went hard after him, particularly on his secular definition of racism and racist that he presented in the video.
Sure. So racism, I would define it as a collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity that are substantiated by racist ideas.
But after reading that comment, I suspected that my critique may have been premature. Perhaps there was more to his definition revealed in the book. I wasn't afraid of being wrong. I was just terrified that I may have so eloquently and passionately misunderstood or misrepresented a man's definitions by critiquing it without first reading the book. That to me amounted to intellectual heresy, the sort I pray to never be guilty of. So to remedy the situation, to find out if indeed I had been wrong, to settle once and for all whether Glenn was right in calling Kendi a lightweight, or whether I was correct to follow in that position, I decided to read the book to get first-hand information, especially about his definitions. And after reading the book, I'm ambivalent. Although my outlook on him improved considerably, there were at least 3 areas where I think Kendi's work falls apart, or at least were faulty in reasoning. The first was a secular definition. The second is tendency to reduce any sort of disparity to discrimination. And the last is appalling solution of solving discrimination with discrimination. To the first point, here is an example of a definition given by Kendi. Racist: one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction or expressing a racist idea. Again, immediately we are hit with the secular definition of racist, just as he had done in the video interviews. But I wanted to be charitable, so I read further to find out what his definitions of racist policy was. Perhaps that would give me a better understanding of what he was trying to convey. Kendi defines a racist policy as any measure that produces or sustains racial inequity between racial groups. This definition ties neatly with my second point of contention with this book, which is interpreting discrimination as the cause of disparity. Continuing to be charitable, I reasoned that if there were indeed policies that were intended and designed to produce racial inequity and do so, you could give that to him and say that, yeah, the definition makes sense. But to Kendi, intent doesn't matter. Just as long as the end product of any racial disparity, then that's racism. But the thing is, disparate outcomes to varying degrees is expected for any policy. No policy is ever guaranteed to have racially equitable outcomes for people of different races. Kendi states this, and I agree. But for Kendi, so-called neutral policies, if they produce racially disparate outcomes, are racist and not neutral after all. So to circumvent this problem, he proposes that policies must be designed and engineered to produce equitable racial outcomes. And this solution is so nebulous that no policy would ever be passed because of the amount of time it would take to fine-tune all the factors guaranteed to achieve a racially equitable outcome. The argument that Kendi is making here is the equality of outcome argument, and intent doesn't matter to him. Or it does, just that the intent should be geared towards attaining racial equity. Not a bad aspiration, by the way, but this makes me conclude that what Kendi is defining here is something entirely different. Race or racism is not necessary to understand, explain, or even prefer solutions to disparities. Yet Kendi sees this as the only way it can be explained, through a racial lens. So it seems that Kendi is currently identifying problems which, by the way, I agree with, but mislabels them as racism. For example, are racial disparities a reality? Are they a problem? Absolutely. But are they caused by racism? Well, not entirely. Thomas Sowell would argue that disparity doesn't necessarily mean discrimination. And if you take any two groups with any amount of historical, cultural, and behavioral differences, you're going to find a disparity. And that is even applicable at the individual level. No two individuals have the same outcome in life. And this individual disparity would show up when people aggregate by groups and may not necessarily mean that one group is being discriminated against. Even in a racially homogeneous society, policies, after the interactions with other factors, would produce disparate outcomes by any measure of the categorization. Heck, you could even find an income disparity between, let's say, people below 5 feet and those above 5 feet. Would heightism account for such disparity? You could find an income disparity between right-handed people as a whole and left-handed people as a whole. That because of handism. My point is, by whatever measure of analysis we're using, disparity would by nature exist between groups, however the metric of classification. And by Kendi's definition and logic, the racial makeup of the NBA, which black players account for about a whopping 74% of all the players, would be considered racist because there isn't an equitable distribution of players of different races in the NBA. But we also understand that a possible reason for this is because there isn't an equitable development and display of talent by the different races in the NBA. So I'm curious to know if Kendi would find the NBA racist on this account. But note that I said equitable development of talent because I don't think that black people have any inherent biological advantages over other races that's enabling them to dominate the NBA. They have, however, developed more capacity in that regard. That is true for any racial group that excels at a particular endeavor. And Jews aren't biologically programmed to know how to make money more than others, but there is a development of that capacity in the Jewish community. Now, I understand that past discrimination can affect a group's socioeconomic outlook to an extent today. Like radiation, its after effects can be felt in a diminishing manner for periods after the initial events occurred. And having this understanding, how should such lingering effects of past discrimination be addressed? The answer shouldn't, as Kendi puts it, the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy for current discrimination is future discrimination. I mean, this is by essence saying America should return to its racist past, but swap one racial group for another. This proposal seems punitive and will most likely breed bad blood in a country that desperately needs racial healing. The idea shouldn't be to hold one group in stasis while dragging up the other, but to continually improve access till other group naturally catches up. While I concede that Kendi currently identifies the problems and the racial wealth gap, he fails miserably at explaining their etymology, defining terms, or even correctly preferring solutions. If Kendi would just replace race with socioeconomic class, his proposals will make much more sense to me. I could even get behind continually fine-tuning policies till approximately equitable socioeconomic outcomes are attained, because I believe we should constantly strive to improve the socioeconomic conditions of everyone in a society. Finally, Kendi is by no means a lightweight. As a historian and as a writer, he's brilliant on those fronts, and there is very little to argue to that. But on the issues of definitions, disparity, and offering solutions to such ideas, it may just be a lightweight.